The scream cut through the winter night like a blade through silk. Nathaniel Mordain heard it from 3 miles away, standing at the window of his tower in Shadow Peak Castle. To human ears, the Transylvanian mountains were silent that January evening in 1884, wrapped in snow and darkness. But Nathaniel had not possessed human ears for 312 years. He heard the scream, a child's scream, high and terrified and absolutely certain that no help was coming. His hand tightened on the stone windowsill. The granite cracked beneath his fingers. 6 years. He had spent 6 years in this castle, speaking to no one, seeing no one, existing in the particular silence of a man who has decided that the world is better off without him in it. 6 years since plague had taken his wife, his daughters, his reason for pretending to be anything other than what he was, a monster. The king of monsters, if the 7 vampire clans of Transylvania were to be believed. They called him the Silent King now. Once they had called him Mordain the Merciful. Once he had walked among humans and protected them from the things that hunted in the dark. Once he had believed he could be more than the curse that ran through his veins. The child screamed again. Nathaniel moved. He was out the window before the thought completed itself, dropping 4 stories to land soundless in the snow. The cold meant nothing to him. Temperature had been a human concern, and he had been human a very long time ago, in a century whose details he could no longer quite recall. What he did recall, with absolute clarity, was the sound of his own daughters screaming. The plague had not cared that their father was the most powerful vampire in 7 provinces. It had taken them anyway, their small bodies burning with fever, their voices calling for him to save them. He had been unable to save them. This child he could save. Nathaniel ran. Not the speed of a man running, but the speed of something that had left humanity behind centuries ago. The forest blurred around him. Snow lifted in his wake. The village of Thornwood passed in a heartbeat. Dark windows and locked doors, and people who had learned long ago not to ask questions about what happened in the mountains after dark. He followed the sound. The old cemetery, the abandoned one on the northern edge of the Thorn estate, where graves dating back 200 years tilted at odd angles beneath winter-bare trees. The wrought iron gates stood open, creaking in the wind that carried the smell of fear and cold and something else. Blood. Nathaniel stopped at the tree line. The scene before him arranged itself with the terrible clarity of a painting. A woman knelt in the snow at the center of the cemetery, her wrists bound behind her back to an old stone grave marker. No cloak, no coat. Her dress was soaked through at the hem, dark with ice and snow. Her dark auburn hair hung loose around a face the color of candle wax. 20 feet from her, 2 small children huddled together beside a tomb. Identical. Twin girls, perhaps 3 years old, with hair so pale it looked silver in the moonlight. One wore a thin nightgown, the other wore even less, her small feet bare and red against the snow. They were not screaming now. They had moved past screaming into something worse. The quiet, shaking stillness of children who had learned that screaming did not bring help. 2 men stood between the woman and the children, one tall and broad, the other wiry and sharp-featured. Both wore heavy coats. Both carried themselves with the casual certainty of men who were following orders and expected no interruption. Nathaniel's vision sharpened. The world narrowed to red-tinged clarity, the way it always did before violence. He could hear their heartbeats, could smell the whiskey on their breath, could see the way they shifted their weight, bored and cold, and waiting for something to be finished. Waiting for the woman to die. The cold would do it eventually. The ropes were tied with intention, not to restrain temporarily, but to hold until exposure completed what cruelty had started. An hour, perhaps 2, and hypothermia would claim her. The children would last even less time. Nathaniel stepped from the trees. The sound of his boots on the frozen ground was deliberate, loud enough to carry. The 2 men turned, slow and assessing, the way men do when they are deciding whether the person approaching them is worth their time. Nathaniel stopped 10 feet away. He was not a large man, had not been, even when he was human. 5'10", lean and spare, with dark hair that fell past his collar, and a face that still, after 3 centuries, carried the sharp angles of his mortal youth. He wore black, as he always did. A long coat against the cold he could not feel, boots that made no sound when he chose silence. The men looked at him, looked at each other. The tall one smiled. "Private business, friend. Move along." Nathaniel did not move along. He looked past them, at the woman. She had lifted her head at the sound of voices. Her eyes found his across the snow-covered cemetery, and he saw the calculation happening behind them. Who is this man? What does he want? Can I afford to hope? Her lips moved, barely a whisper, but Nathaniel heard it clearly. Please. The world tilted. Memory crashed over him like a wave. His wife Morgana in their bed as the plague consumed her. His twin daughters Celeste and Luna, their small hands reaching for him. The word they had whispered with their last breaths. Please. He had not been able to save them, but he was not too late for this. Nathaniel looked at the 2 men. When he spoke, his voice was quiet, absolutely calm. The voice of someone stating a simple, incontrovertible fact. Leave her alone. The tall man's smile widened. Like I said, friend, private business. The woman belongs to the Thorne family. We're just step away from her. Something in the way Nathaniel said it made both men hesitate. It was not the volume, it was not anger. It was the particular quality of certainty that comes from a being who has lived long enough to know exactly what he is capable of, and who has absolutely no doubt about the outcome of the next 60 seconds. The wiry man's hand moved toward his belt, toward the knife there. Nathaniel's eyes flashed red. Not metaphorically red, actually red, the crimson glow of a predator whose patience has reached its limit. In the moonlight, the effect was unmistakable, inhuman. The irises turned the color of fresh blood, and the pupils contracted to vertical slits. Both men took a step back. They did not make a conscious decision to step back. Their bodies made the decision for them, the way prey animals freeze when they suddenly realize they are standing in front of something that can kill them. Jesus Christ, the wiry man whispered. Nathaniel crossed the distance between them in less than a second. One moment he was 10 feet away. The next he was standing between the 2 men, one hand on each of their chests. He did not push them, did not need to. They stumbled backward on their own, falling into the snow, scrambling away from him with wide eyes and pale faces. Go, Nathaniel said quietly. Tell your employer exactly what you saw here. They went. Nathaniel listened to their footsteps crashing through the undergrowth, 2 sets of boots running blind with fear toward the lights of Thornwood Village. He listened until the sound faded entirely, until the cemetery was silent again, except for the wind and the ragged breathing of the woman behind him. Then he turned. She was watching him. Her eyes were amber, he saw now. A clear, startling amber that caught the moonlight like glass. Fear lived in those eyes, but also something else. Intelligence. Assessment. The look of someone who had learned long ago to evaluate danger quickly and completely. She had seen his eyes. She knew what he was. Nathaniel knelt in the snow in front of her, moving slowly, keeping his hands visible. When he spoke, he kept his voice level and gentle. I am not going to hurt you. I am going to cut those ropes. That is all. She flinched when he reached behind her, her whole body pulling back against the stone marker, even though there was nowhere to go. But she did not scream, did not fight. Her survival instinct was at war with her exhaustion, and exhaustion was winning. Nathaniel found the first knot. Whoever had tied it had known their business. This was not rope meant to restrain temporarily. This was rope meant to hold until death. His jaw tightened as he worked the knot free. What is your name? He asked. Isolde. Her voice was barely there, hoarse from cold and screaming. Isolde Thorne, widow. The rope gave way. She gasped as her arms came forward, circulation returning in a way that clearly hurt. Nathaniel moved to the second knot, his movements quick and efficient. The children? My daughters. A pause, thin and fragile. Raven and Wren. The second rope fell away. Isolde pitched forward, and Nathaniel caught her. She was so light it stopped him for a moment. The particular lightness of a body that has been giving everything it has, with too little coming back in return. Her skin was ice cold against his hands, her breathing shallow and unsteady. Raven, Wren, her voice broke on their names. I will get them, I promise. He stood, lifting her as he did. She did not weigh enough. Her body trembled against him, and he could feel her heart racing, too fast and too weak. Hypothermia, already setting in. She needed warmth. She needed it now. Nathaniel turned to children. They had not moved. The two little girls sat pressed together beside the tomb, both of them watching him with identical eyes. Not amber like their mothers. Violet. A deep, clear violet that seemed to glow in the moonlight, like amethyst catching fire. The one in the nightgown spoke first. Her voice was small but remarkably steady, with the eerie composure of a child who has learned to make fast decisions about adults. Can you carry her? Perfectly matter of fact, as though asking a stranger to carry her dying mother through a frozen cemetery was simply the next logical step in a very long night. Nathaniel looked at this child, 3 years old, barefoot in the snow, her sister beside her shaking so hard her teeth chattered, both of them looking at him with those extraordinary violet eyes, waiting for his answer. Yes, he said, I can carry her. The little girl stood. She was so small. The top of her head would barely reach his waist. She walked toward him through the snow, leaving tiny footprints, and reached up to take his hand. Okay, she said, then I will walk. Her hand was freezing in his, her fingers barely wrapped around two of his. She looked up at him, and there was something in her expression that hit him like a blade to the chest. Trust. This child, who had just watched two grown men tie her mother to a gravestone and leave her to die, who was standing in front of a creature whose eyes glowed red in the dark, was choosing to trust him. What is your name? Nathaniel asked. Raven. And your sister? Wren. Raven turned to look at the other little girl, who had not moved from beside the tomb. She does not talk much, not since Papa died. Nathaniel knelt, still holding Isolde against his chest with one arm. He looked at the second child, the one who was shaking so hard she could barely sit upright. Wren, he said gently, I am going to take you and your sister and your mother somewhere warm, somewhere safe. Will you come with me? Wren stared at him. Her violet eyes were huge in her small face, and she was making a sound in the back of her throat, a high, keening sound that was not quite crying and not quite breathing. Raven squeezed Nathaniel's hand. She will come. She is just scared. That is all right, Nathaniel said. He looked at Wren. You do not have to talk. You just have to hold on. He shifted Isolde in his arms, settling her more securely, and moved toward Wren. The child's eyes followed him, wary and frightened, but she did not pull away when he reached down and lifted her with his free arm. She was so light. They were both so light. Like birds, he thought, like the names they carried. Wren's small body was rigid against him for a moment. Then, with a sound that might have been a sob, she turned her face into his shoulder and wrapped her arms around his neck. Her bare feet were ice against his ribs, where his coat hung open. Nathaniel stood, Isolde in one arm, unconscious now and sinking deeper, Wren in the other, clinging to him like a lifeline. Raven's hand still wrapped around his fingers, looking up at him with that unnerving, ancient composure. Where are we going? Raven asked. Home, Nathaniel said. It was not until he said it that he realized he meant it. Shadow Peak Castle had not been home for 6 years. It had been a tomb, a place to wait out eternity in silence. But looking down at these three people, this woman and these children, who needed him in a way no one had needed him since Morgana and Celeste and Luna had died, it occurred to him that perhaps home was not a place. Perhaps home was simply having someone to protect. He walked out of the cemetery with them. Raven walked beside him for perhaps 100 yards, her small legs working hard to keep up. Then the exhaustion hit her, the way it always hits children when the crisis passes and the adrenaline fades. Her steps faltered. Her hand went slack in his. Nathaniel stopped. He knelt, awkward with his arms already full, and Raven climbed onto his back without being asked, her small arms wrapping around his neck from behind, her cheek pressed against his shoulder. "Thank you, King," she whispered. Nathaniel went still. "What did you call me?" But Raven did not answer. She was already asleep, her breathing evening out, her small body warm against his back. King. She had called him King. Nathaniel stood, carrying all three of them now. Isolde unconscious in his arms, Ren silent and shaking against his chest, Raven asleep on his back, her breath soft against his neck. He ran. Not the speed he had used before, not the blur of motion that would terrify them if they woke, but faster than any human could run, his feet barely touching the snow, carrying them through the forest toward the mountain and the castle that waited there. Shadow Peak rose from the rocks like something grown rather than built. 7 towers connected by walls of black stone that had stood for 400 years. Once it had been filled with light and life. Servants and soldiers and scholars, the seat of the Mordain family, one of the 7 great vampire clans that governed Transylvania. Now it was empty, except for him. The gates opened at his approach, not because he touched them, but because the castle knew him, recognized him. The wards he had woven into the stone 3 centuries ago responded to his presence, and the iron gates swung wide without a sound. Nathaniel carried his 3 refugees through the courtyard and up the stairs to the great hall. His footsteps echoed in the silence. Dust covered the furniture. Cobwebs hung in the corners. He had not bothered to maintain the castle for years, had not seen the point. Now, looking at it through their eyes, through the eyes of a woman and 2 children who needed warmth and safety, he saw how far he had let it fall. No matter. Fire first. Warmth first. Everything else could wait. The main hall had a fireplace large enough to stand in. Nathaniel laid Isolde on the long sofa nearest to it, settled Ren beside her, and carefully detached Raven from his back. Both girls immediately crawled to their mother, pressing against her sides like puppies seeking warmth. Then Nathaniel built a fire. He had not built a fire in 6 years, had not needed to. Cold meant nothing to him, but his hands remembered the motions. Kindling first, then larger wood. The flint and steel were still in the box beside the hearth, exactly where they had been the last time Morgana had asked him to light the evening fire. The flame caught, grew. Within minutes, heat was pouring into the room. Nathaniel stood, watching the 3 figures on the sofa. Isolde's breathing was too shallow. Ren had not made a sound since they left the cemetery. Raven slept with the deep, absolute exhaustion of a child whose body had simply overridden her fear. He moved to the storage rooms, found blankets that smelled of cedar and age, found clothing that had belonged to Morgana, soft dresses and warm shawls, found the small clothes his daughters had worn, carefully folded and put away, waiting for them to grow into them. They had never grown into them. Nathaniel brought the blankets to the sofa, covered all 3 of them, and added more wood to the fire. Then he went to the kitchen, dusty and unused but still stocked with preserved foods, and began heating water. Broth first, something warm and gentle for bodies that had been pushed to the edge. He found dried herbs, vegetables preserved in salt, a ham that had been hanging in the cellar since before he stopped caring about such things. His hands moved through the familiar motions of cooking, a skill he had learned as a young man and had not forgotten even after 3 centuries of not needing food. While the broth simmered, he returned to the great hall. Isolde had woken. She was sitting up slightly, both arms wrapped around her daughters, and she was crying. Not loudly, silently, tears streaming down her face as she held Raven and Wren against her chest, her mouth moving in what might have been prayer or thanks, or simply the incoherent relief of someone who thought they were going to die and discovered they were not. Nathaniel stopped in the doorway. She looked up, saw him. Her arms tightened around her daughters. "I am making broth," he said quietly, "for when you are ready." Isolde stared at him. Her amber eyes were red from crying, her face pale and exhausted. She looked at his eyes, brown now, not red, perfectly human in the firelight, and then at the room around them, the grand fireplace, the ancient furniture, the tapestries on the walls depicting battles and coronations and vampire kings from centuries past. "Where are we?" she whispered. "Shadow Peak Castle. You are safe here." "You are—" She stopped, started again. "The men called you. They said, 'I am Nathaniel Mordain, king of the Transylvanian clans.'" He said it simply, without pride or apology. "In fact, I will not hurt you. You have my word." "Your word," Isolde repeated. The hysteria was building in her voice, the shock catching up. "The word of a vampire. The word of the only person in 100 miles who will stand between you and whatever put you in that cemetery tonight." That stopped her. She looked at him and he saw her doing the calculation, saw her weighing her options, saw her arrive at the only conclusion that made sense. She had no other options. "Why?" she asked. "Why did you save us?" Nathaniel was quiet for a long moment. The fire crackled. One of the twins, Wren, he thought, made a small sound in her sleep. "Because 6 years ago I had a wife and twin daughters," he said finally, "and when they died I could not save them. Tonight I could save you." Isolde's breath caught. "You had daughters?" "Celeste and Luna. They were 4 years old when the plague took them." He looked at Raven and Wren. "They look like your daughters, the same age, the same—" He stopped. "I heard your daughters screaming. I could not walk away." Isolde followed his gaze to her sleeping children. When she spoke again, her voice was very soft. "Their names are Raven and Wren. They are 3 years old. They are—" She stopped, her hands tightened in their hair. "They are everything." "I know." And he did know, could see it in the way she held them, in the way she had not asked about herself, had not asked about her injuries, had asked only about her daughters. He recognized that love, had felt it himself once, still felt it, in the empty spaces where Celeste and Luna used to be. "I will bring the broth," Nathaniel said. "Then you should sleep. Tomorrow will be—" He paused, choosing his words carefully. "Tomorrow will require strength." He turned to go. "Nathaniel." He stopped. It was the first time she had used his name. Isolde was looking at him with an expression he could not quite read. Fear was still there, yes, but something else too. Something that might have been the beginning of trust, fragile and uncertain. "Thank you," she said, "for not walking away." Nathaniel nodded once and went to get the broth. He did not tell her that he had spent 6 years walking away from the world, from his responsibilities, from the clans that needed their king and the humans who needed his protection. Walking away from everything except his grief. He did not tell her that she and her daughters were the first thing in 6 years that had made him want to walk towards something instead. Some truths were too large to speak aloud in a single night. Isolde slept fitfully on the sofa, wrapped in blankets that smelled of cedar in centuries. Raven and Wren curled against her like cats, their silver-pale hair tangled together, impossible to tell where one child ended and the other began. Nathaniel sat in the chair across from them, watching. He had spent 300 years learning to sit perfectly still. It was a vampire skill, the ability to become so motionless that humans forgot you were in the room. But tonight's stillness felt different. Tonight, it felt like vigil, like keeping watch. The fire burned low. Nathaniel added wood without making a sound. Outside, the wind howled through the mountains, and snow began to fall again, heavy and thick. By morning, the roads would be impassable, which was fine, better even. It would buy them time. Time for what, he was not entirely sure. But the men who had tied his soul to that gravestone would report back to their employer. And that employer, whoever had ordered this particular cruelty, would not simply accept defeat. Men who left women and children to freeze to death did not have consciences that troubled them. They had goals. And goals that required this level of brutality did not disappear because one plan failed. Nathaniel knew this because he had lived long enough to recognize patterns, had seen enough of human cruelty to understand its logic, even when that logic was twisted beyond recognition. Someone wanted Isolde dead, and more than that, someone wanted her to die in a way that looked like misfortune, an accident, a widow who fled her home in a state of distress and succumbed to the elements before help could find her. The children, too, freezing to death in a cemetery while searching for their mother. A tragedy, so sad, so preventable, if only the poor woman had not been so unstable. It was a story, and Nathaniel had been alive long enough to know that the cruelest men were always the best storytellers. A sound pulled him from his thoughts. Raven had woken. She sat up slowly, careful not to disturb her mother or sister, and looked around the great hall with wide violet eyes. The firelight caught in them, made them glow softly. She saw Nathaniel watching her and did not seem surprised. "You are still here," she said. "I am still here." "Good." Raven slipped down from the sofa, her bare feet silent on the stone floor, and walked across the room to him. She stopped just in front of his chair, studying him with that unnerving intensity. "You have sad eyes," she said finally. "Like us." Nathaniel tilted his head slightly. "Like you?" "Mama says Ren and I have sad eyes, because we see things." Raven paused. "Do you see things too? What kind of things?" Raven reached out and touched his hand where it rested on the arm of the chair. Her small fingers were warm against his cold skin. When she spoke, her voice dropped to a whisper. "The things that hurt you, the things that happened before." Nathaniel went very still. This child, this 3-year-old child, was looking at him with eyes that seemed far too old for her face, and she was talking about seeing the past, about seeing pain. "Raven," he said carefully, "what do you mean when you say you see things?" But Raven had already moved on, her attention shifting the way young children's attention does, quick and absolute. She was looking at the tapestries on the walls now, at the faded images of vampire lords and ladies from centuries past. "This was your family," she said, not a question, a statement. "Yes." "Where are they now?" "Gone, most of them." "Like our family?" "Yes, like your family." Raven turned back to him. "The bad man took our house. Mama says he wants to take us too. She says he wants to—" The little girl stopped, her face scrunched up with the effort of remembering exact words. "He wants to eliminate the bloodline. That is what Mama said." Ice ran down Nathaniel's spine. Eliminate the bloodline. Those were not words a child should know. Those were not words anyone should say in front of a child. But they were words that told Nathaniel everything he needed to know about the danger these 3 people were in. This was not simple greed, not just a man trying to steal property. This was systematic, planned, the kind of plan that required removing every legal heir. "Raven," Nathaniel said gently, "who is the bad man?" "Victor. He is Mama's—" She frowned. "Stepson? Is that the word?" "His father was Mama's husband before his father died." "Victor Thorne?" "Yes. Victor says Ren and I are not real Thorns. He says we do not belong in the house. He says—" The little girl's voice cracked. For the first time since waking, she looked her age. 3 years old, frightened, trying very hard to be brave. Nathaniel did something he had not done in 6 years. He reached out and pulled a child into his arms. Raven came willingly, climbing into his lap and pressing her face against his chest. She did not cry, just held on, her small hands fisting in his shirt. "You are safe here," Nathaniel said quietly. "Both of you. Your mother too. Victor Thorne will not take you, I promise." "How do you know?" Her voice was muffled against his chest. "Because I am the king of this land, and kings protect what is theirs." Raven pulled back slightly to look up at him. "Are we yours?" The question hit him like a physical blow. This child asking with perfect innocence whether she belonged to him, whether he would claim her. Nathaniel looked at her violet eyes, at the silver-pale hair that reminded him so much of Celeste and Luna, at the trust in her expression, fragile and new and absolutely undeserved. He thought about saying no, about explaining that she was simply under his protection, that this was temporary, that when the danger passed, she would return to her life and he would return to his. He thought about it. He did not say it. "Yes," Nathaniel said instead, "you are mine, all three of you, and I protect what is mine." Raven smiled. It was small and tired, but it was real. She settled back against his chest, her breathing slowing, sleep pulling at her again. "Good," she whispered. "I like being yours, King." Then she was asleep, just like that, the way children can surrender to exhaustion, even in the arms of monsters. Nathaniel sat holding her as the fire burned low, and the snow fell outside, and the night stretched toward dawn. He sat holding her and remembered what it felt like to be someone's father, someone's protector, someone who mattered. The sun would rise in a few hours. It would not touch him here, deep in the castle, away from windows. But it would come nonetheless, and with it would come questions and consequences, and the man named Victor Thorne who wanted to eliminate a bloodline. Let him come. Nathaniel Mordain had been the silent king for 6 years, hiding in his castle, speaking to no one, engaging with nothing. But before that, he had been Mordain the Merciful, protector of the innocent, king of 7 clans. He had forgotten, for a while, what it meant to care about something enough to fight for it. This woman and these children had reminded him, and God help anyone who tried to take them away. Dawn came cold and pale through the high windows of Shadow Peak Castle. Nathaniel had not moved from his chair all night. Raven still slept in his lap, her silver hair spread across his chest like moonlight made solid. Across the room, Isolde and Ren remained tangled together on the sofa, buried beneath layers of blankets that rose and fell with their breathing. 3 heartbeats, 3 lives, 3 people who had somehow become his responsibility in the space of a single winter night. The fire had burned to embers. Nathaniel rose carefully, settling Raven onto the chair he had occupied, tucking the blanket around her small body. She murmured something in her sleep, a word he could not quite catch, and curled into the warmth he had left behind. He rebuilt the fire, added wood, watched the flames catch and grow. Outside, the snow had stopped, leaving the world wrapped in white silence. The roads would be impassable for at least another day. Good. It bought them time. Time to prepare for what was coming. Because something was coming. Nathaniel could feel it the way he felt storms approaching. A pressure in the air that had nothing to do with weather and everything to do with the particular malice of men who did not accept defeat. He was standing at the window, watching the sun rise over mountains he could not walk in, when Isolde woke. He heard her breath catch, heard the rustle of blankets as she sat up, disoriented, taking in the unfamiliar room. Then he heard her panic as she realized one of her daughters was missing. "Raven is here." Nathaniel did not turn from the window. Asleep in the chair, she woke in the night. "We spoke. She is safe." Silence. Then the sound of Isolde crossing the room, her footsteps unsteady. She appeared beside him at the window, wrapped in one of Morgana's old shawls, and looked at Raven sleeping peacefully by the fire. She talked to you? She did. What did she say? Nathaniel finally looked at her. In the morning light, Isolde was different than she had been in the cemetery. Still pale, still exhausted, but no longer dying. Color had returned to her face. Her amber eyes were clear, assessing him with the same careful intelligence he had seen the night before. She said, "Victor Thorne wants to eliminate your bloodline." Isolde's face went very still. She should not know those words. No, but she does. Nathaniel turned back to the window. "Tell me about Victor Thorne." For a long moment, Isolde said nothing. Then she began to speak, her voice low and controlled. The voice of someone who had learned to present facts rather than emotions, because emotions could be used against her. She told him about Damien Thorne, her husband of 8 years. A good man, she insisted. Not like most men of property and power. He had married her knowing she was pregnant with another man's child. Had loved Raven and Wren as his own daughters. She told him about Victor, Damien's son from a previous marriage. 28 years old, ambitious, and cold in a way his father had never been. Victor had always resented Isolde, had always made it clear that she and her daughters were interlopers in the Thorne legacy. 2 weeks ago, Damien had died, suddenly, in his study, alone. The doctor had called it heart failure. Isolde had suspected poison. The day before he died, she said quietly, Damien changed his will. He left the main estate to Victor, yes, but he left the northern lands, 200 acres including mineral rights, to Raven and Wren, in trust until they come of age. Nathaniel's eyes narrowed. Mineral rights? Silver, a significant vein according to the last survey, worth perhaps £500,000. Isolde's hands tightened in the shawl. Victor cannot inherit that land as long as Raven and Wren are alive, and I retain custody. If I were to die, if the girls were to die, the land reverts to the main estate, to Victor. So he kills his father, frames you as unstable, arranges for you and the children to die of exposure in a way that looks like tragic misfortune. Yes, the simple, terrible logic of it settled between them like a stone. He will not stop, Isolde said. Victor is patient, methodical. He has been planning this since before Damien was cold. Last night was only the first attempt. There will be others. Nathaniel looked at her, really looked at her, this woman who had survived 8 years with a good man and was now facing death from that man's son. She was not crying, was not begging. She was presenting him with information, clearly and completely, because she understood that information was a weapon. He respected that. The will, he said. Do you have a copy? No. Victor took everything from the house the night Damien died. Papers, documents, personal effects. He said it was for safekeeping. The land office will have filed a copy if Victor has not already destroyed it. He cannot destroy official records without drawing suspicion. And if Damien filed the mineral rights separately, Nathaniel paused. I know someone who can help. Someone who understands both human law and how to navigate it when humans would prefer to ignore it. Who? My sister. Isolde blinked. Your sister? Lady Octavia Mordain. She lives in Vienna, serves as diplomat between the vampire clans and the Austrian Empire. He turned from the window. If anyone can unravel Victor's legal machinations, it is Octavia. And she will bring someone with her. A barrister who specializes in cases that involve, he paused, choosing his words carefully, unusual circumstances. You mean cases involving vampires? Among other things. Isolde studied him for a long moment. You would do this? Involve your sister? Bring a lawyer here? For us? I would. Why? It was the same question she had asked last night. Why did you save us? But this time there was something different in her voice. Not desperation, not calculation. Genuine curiosity about what motivated a creature who had lived 300 years and could easily have left three strangers to die. Nathaniel looked at Raven sleeping by the fire, at Wren who had begun to stir on the sofa, her small face pressed into the cushions. Because Victor Thorne represents everything I have spent 3 centuries fighting, he said quietly. Men who use power as a weapon, who destroy innocence because it is convenient, who believe the law exists to serve them rather than justice. He met Isolde's eyes. I did not save you last night so that Victor could try again tomorrow. I saved you so that you could live, and living means ending the threat. And if ending the threat requires... Isolde stopped, started again. What you are, what you can do, that terrifies people. I know. They will fear you more than they fear him. Let them. The absoluteness in his voice made Isolde take a small step back. Not in fear, exactly, in recognition. She was seeing him clearly now, Nathaniel realized. Not as the creature who had saved her in a moment of mercy, but as the king he actually was. The being who had ruled 7 vampire clans for 3 centuries, and who did not particularly care whether humans approved of his methods. I will send for Octavia this morning, Nathaniel said. She can be here in 3 days if she rides fast. In the meantime, you and your daughter stay here. Do not leave the castle grounds. Do not show yourselves in the village. Victor will be looking for you. He thinks we are dead. He hopes you are dead. There is a difference. Nathaniel moved past her toward the door. I am going to send a message. When I return, we will discuss what comes next. He had reached the doorway when Isolde spoke again. Nathaniel, he stopped. Last night Raven called you king. She has never... Isolde's voice caught slightly. She has never trusted anyone that quickly. Not since her father died. Not even me, sometimes. But she trusted you immediately, completely. Nathaniel looked back at her. Is that a question? I am trying to understand why. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, children see what adults choose to ignore. They see intention. They see whether someone means them harm or safety. Your daughter looked at me and saw... He paused, searching for the right words. She saw someone who would not let her fall. Isolde's eyes were bright with something that might have been tears. And will you? Let us fall? No. One word. Absolute and unyielding. Isolde nodded once, accepting this, and returned to the sofa where Wren was beginning to wake. Nathaniel left them there, surrounded by warmth and firelight and the temporary safety of walls that had stood for 400 years. He had a message to send. And after that, he had preparations to make. Because Victor Thorne was not the only threat. He was simply the most immediate one. Behind him stood a system that would protect him, courts that would believe him, officials who would take his money and ignore the truth. Nathaniel had fought systems before. He was willing to do it again. Lady Octavia Mordain arrived late the next afternoon, riding through snow that had begun to fall again with the relentless determination of a Transylvanian winter that was not yet finished. Nathaniel heard her before he saw her. The sound of hooves on the mountain road, the jingle of harnesses, voices calling out in German and Romanian, the 2 languages Octavia spoke interchangeably when she wanted to be understood by everyone. He met her at the gates. Octavia was 56 years old in appearance, though she had stopped aging at that number 200 years ago. Tall and regal, with silver-streaked dark hair pulled back in an elegant chignon, and eyes the same dark brown as Nathaniel's. She wore traveling clothes of deep burgundy wool, and she dismounted from her horse with the practiced grace of someone who had been riding since before railways existed. Behind her came a second rider, a man, younger looking, perhaps 45, with sharp features and steel-gray eyes behind wire spectacles. He wore black, as lawyers often did, but his coat was of excellent quality and his boots were custom-made. Nathaniel, Octavia embraced her brother, something she had not been able to do for 6 years because he had refused to see anyone. You look terrible. You look the same as always. I know, it is a curse. She pulled back, studying his face. Your message said you needed help with a legal matter involving a widow and 2 children. That is substantially different from your usual, leave me alone forever. Circumstances have changed. Clearly, Octavia turned to the man behind her. This is Alaric Graythorne, barrister, specializes in property law, inheritance disputes, and cases where the supernatural elements cannot be ignored, but also cannot be acknowledged openly. He is expensive, brilliant, and completely trustworthy. Alaric inclined his head. Lord Mordain, your sister speaks highly of you. She is being generous. No, I am being accurate. Octavia looked toward the castle. Where are they? The widow and children? Inside, Isolde Thorne and her daughters, Raven and Wren, 3 years old, twin girls. Something shifted in Octavia's expression. She knew about Celeste and Luna, knew what their loss had done to Nathaniel, knew that 6 years of silence had been him trying to survive grief that would have destroyed a mortal man. Twins, she said softly. Yes. And you found them how? Tied to a gravestone in a cemetery, left to freeze to death. Octavia's face hardened. When she spoke again, her voice had dropped several degrees. Tell me everything. They walked to the castle while Nathaniel explained. Victor Thorne, the inheritance, the 200 acres with silver mines, the systematic elimination of heirs, the fact that Victor was willing to murder children to secure his fortune. By the time they reached the Great Hall, Octavia's expression was the particular kind of cold that came before she did something that would ruin someone's life completely and without remorse. Isolde stood when they entered, Raven and Wren pressed against her sides. The girls were dressed now in clothes Nathaniel had found for them. Simple dresses that had once belonged to his daughters, altered hastily to fit their smaller frames. Both children stared at the newcomers with wide, violet eyes. Octavia stopped. She stared at the twins. Then she looked at Nathaniel with an expression he could not quite read. Their eyes, she said quietly. I know. Violet, true violet, that is not a human eye color. I am aware. Nathaniel, do you understand what this means? But before Nathaniel could answer, Raven stepped forward. She walked straight up to Octavia with that unnerving confidence and looked up at her without fear. You are the king's sister, Raven said. I am. My name is Octavia. I am Raven. That is Wren, she pointed at her twin. She listens very carefully. Octavia knelt, bringing herself to eye level with Raven. I can see that. You are like the king, but different. Raven tilted her head. You are not as sad. The words hit like stones in still water. Octavia glanced up at Nathaniel, then back to Raven. You are very perceptive, little one. Mama says I see too much. Raven paused. Do you think I see too much? I think you see exactly what needs to be seen. Raven seemed satisfied with this answer. She returned to her mother's side, and Wren immediately took her hand, the two of them standing together like bookends. Octavia rose. She looked at Isolde. Mrs. Thorne, I am Lady Octavia Mordain. This is Barrister Alaric Graythorne. My brother has explained your situation. We are here to help. Thank you. Isolde's voice was steady, but Nathaniel could hear the exhaustion beneath it. 2 days of relative safety had not erased 8 years of survival. I do not know how to repay. You do not repay. Octavia's voice was firm. Victor Thorne attempted to murder you and your children. That is not a debt situation. That is a justice situation. And justice, fortunately, is something I am very good at. Alaric stepped forward, opening the leather case he carried. Mrs. Thorne, I need to ask you several questions. They will not be pleasant, but I need to understand exactly what we are dealing with legally. I understand. First, your husband's will. When was it changed? The day before he died, January 14th. And you were present when it was changed? No, Damien went to the solicitor in town alone. He came home that evening and told me what he had done. He said, Isolde's voice caught. He said he wanted to make sure the girls were protected, that Victor could not touch their inheritance. Did he say why he felt the girls needed protection from Victor? He did not say explicitly, but Damien knew his son. He knew Victor resented the girls, resented me. Alaric made notes in a small journal. And after your husband died, Victor took control of the household? Immediately, that same night, he removed documents, everything, papers, ledgers, personal correspondence. He said it was standard procedure, that as executor of the estate, he was responsible for securing all property. Was he named executor in the will? Isolde hesitated. I do not know. I never saw the will. Victor said he would provide me with a copy in due time. He never did. No. Alaric exchanged a look with Octavia. That is illegal. Widows have a right to see their husband's will within 48 hours of death. Victor violated probate law by withholding it. Will anyone care? Isolde's voice was bitter. Victor is a thorn. The Thorns have owned half of Thornwood for 3 generations. The magistrate owes his position to Victor's influence. The priest owes his church to Thorn donations. Who is going to challenge him? I am. Alaric's voice was quiet and absolutely certain. I have challenged men more powerful than Victor Thorn. I have done it successfully. The law is the law, Mrs. Thorn, and when it is broken this egregiously, there are consequences. He asked more questions. About the night Damien died. About the 2 men who had tied Isolde to the gravestone. About Victor's behavior in the weeks leading up to the murder attempt. Isolde answered everything. Her voice remained level, factual, the voice of a woman who had learned that emotion was a luxury she could not afford. But Nathaniel saw what the questions cost her, saw the way her hands tightened in her skirts, saw the way she glanced at her daughters every few minutes, reassuring herself they were still there. When Alaric finally closed his journal, Isolde looked like she had run a marathon. That is sufficient for now, Alaric said. I will need to visit the land office in Thornwood, obtain copies of the will, the property deeds, the mineral surveys. If Victor has been as careless as I suspect, he will have left trails. He has also left witnesses, Octavia said. She looked at Nathaniel. The 2 men who tied Mrs. Thorn to the gravestone, do you know who they were? One was called Finch. The other I did not recognize. Finch, Isolde's voice was sharp. Roy Finch. He has worked for the Thorn estate for years. Damien trusted him. I did not. Where would Finch be now? If Victor is smart, he will have sent Finch away, given him money to disappear until this is over. Octavia smiled. It was not a pleasant smile. Then we need to find him before he disappears. How? I know people. Octavia's smile widened slightly. People who are very good at finding other people who do not wish to be found. Nathaniel knew what that meant. Octavia had connections throughout Transylvania and beyond. Connections to vampire clans, yes, but also to the networks of informants and thieves and working people who saw everything and told nothing unless properly motivated. If Roy Finch was anywhere within 200 miles, Octavia would find him. There is one more thing, Alaric said. He was looking at Raven and Wren with an expression that was part curiosity, part concern. The children, their eyes. What about their eyes? Isolde's voice had gone defensive. Violet eyes are not a natural human trait. They occur in perhaps 1 in 10 million people. And even then they are typically blue with red undertones, not true violet. He paused. Mrs. Thorn, is there anything unusual about your family history? Your bloodline? Isolde was very still. Why do you ask? Because if Victor is claiming the children are cursed or unnatural as part of his argument for guardianship, we need to be prepared to counter that argument. He has said that. Isolde's voice was barely above a whisper. He has said they are marked, that their eyes are proof of... She stopped. Proof of what? Isolde looked at Nathaniel, then at Octavia, then at her daughters, who were watching this entire exchange with those extraordinary violet eyes. My mother was a seer, she said finally, a woman who saw visions, who knew things before they happened. The village called her witch. When she died, I thought... She swallowed hard. I thought the gift had died with her. But Raven and Wren, they see things, Nathaniel said quietly. Isolde nodded. Not constantly, not clearly, but yes. Sometimes Raven knows when something bad is about to happen. Sometimes Wren dreams things that come true. I have tried to hide it, tried to teach them to hide it. But Victor knows. He has always known. The room was very quiet. Then Octavia spoke, her voice carrying a weight Nathaniel recognized. The weight of knowledge that changed everything. A seer bloodline, she said. That is why he wants them dead. Not just for the inheritance, for the power. What do you mean? Octavia looked at Nathaniel. Tell her, she deserves to know. Nathaniel moved to the window, looked out at the snow-covered mountains. When he spoke, his voice was careful and controlled. There are creatures in this world who would pay enormous sums for the blood of a seer. Blood that can grant visions. Blood that can break curses. Blood that can... He paused. Blood that can complete transformations. What kind of transformations? The kind that turn a man into something more than human. Understanding dawned slowly in Isolde's eyes. Then horror. You think Victor wants to become a vampire? Yes. Octavia's voice was grim. And not just any vampire. A vampire with seer abilities. Such a creature would be nearly unstoppable. They would see attacks before they happened. Would know their enemies' plans. Would be able to compel humans with visions, as well as with traditional vampiric influence. That is not possible, Isolde whispered. It is not common, but it is possible. Octavia knelt in front of Raven and Wren. Children, may I look at your eyes? Both girls looked to their mother. Isolde, pale and shaking, nodded. Octavia studied their faces carefully. Then she did something Nathaniel had not expected. She pricked her own finger with a small knife from her belt and held out a single drop of blood. Raven, can you tell me what you see when you look at this? Raven stared at the drop of blood. Her violet eyes began to glow, just slightly, like amethyst catching light. I see, she stopped, tilted her head. I see you, but younger. I see you dancing with the king when he was different. When he was, she paused, happy. Octavia's hand trembled. When the king was happy, she repeated. Yes, that was a very long time ago. She turned to Wren. And you, little one, what do you see? Wren looked at the blood. Her eyes glowed brighter than her sister's. When she spoke, her voice was so quiet Nathaniel almost missed it. I see the bad man. He has red eyes. He wants to take us. He is... Wren's small face crumpled. He is coming. Tonight. Nathaniel was across the room in less than a second. Tonight? You are certain? Wren nodded, tears spilling down her cheeks. Tonight, when the moon is high, he is bringing others. Men with silver. Men with... She stopped, struggling with a word. With faith. Priests, Alaric said grimly. He is bringing priests to declare the children cursed. Or worse, Octavia said, to perform an exorcism. The word hung in the air like poison. Isolde grabbed both her daughters, pulling them against her. No, no, he will not touch them. I will not let him. He will not touch them. Nathaniel's voice cut through her panic like a blade. Octavia, how many can you summon before nightfall? From the clans? Perhaps 20. But Nathaniel, if we use clan vampires to defend against humans, it will confirm every fear they have about us. I do not care about their fears. I care about keeping these children alive. And when they come with an army because you proved you are the monster They always believe you were? Then I will deal with the army. Octavia grabbed his arm. Brother, think. There is a better way. Tell me. We make Victor come to us on our terms. We do not wait for his attack. We force him to act in the open, in front of witnesses he cannot control. How? Alaric stepped forward. We file a formal complaint, today, with the magistrate in Thornwood. We accuse Victor of attempted murder, fraud, and violation of probate law. We demand an immediate hearing. The magistrate will refuse. He cannot refuse. Not if we invoke the Emergency Jurisdiction Act. Not if we have evidence of immediate danger to minors. What evidence? Wren's vision. Alaric looked at the little girl. If she can testify that she saw the attack coming, if we have a seer's vision documented before the attack happens, then we have prophetic evidence. It is admissible in Austrian Empire law under supernatural circumstances. Octavia nodded slowly. It is brilliant, but it requires Wren to speak in front of the magistrate, in front of Victor. Can she do that? Everyone looked at the small girl. Wren looked back at them. Then she did something extraordinary. She stood up, walked across the room to Nathaniel, reached up and took his hand. I can do it, she whispered, if the king is with me. Nathaniel looked down at this child who was asking him to walk into a legal proceeding, into a human town, into a situation where his presence would terrify everyone in the room. She was asking him to be seen, to be known, to step out of 6 years of silence and into a world that would call him monster. For her, for her sister, for their mother, for the family he had chosen to protect. He knelt so they were eye to eye. I will be with you, he said, every moment, I promise. Wren nodded. Then she wrapped her small arms around his neck and held on. Over her silver pale head, Nathaniel met Octavia's eyes. His sister smiled. It was small and sad and proud all at once. Welcome back, brother, she said quietly. We missed you. Nathaniel said nothing, but he held the child in his arms and thought about what it meant to be a king. Not the power, not the fear, not the centuries of existence that separated him from the humans he had once been. A king was someone who protected the helpless, someone who stood between innocence and those who would destroy it, someone who did not walk away. He had walked away for 6 years. He would not walk away again. They rode to Thornwood at sunset, a small party moving through snow that had begun to fall again. Nathaniel on his black horse, Octavia beside him on her gray mare, Alaric following with his leather case of documents, and behind them, in a covered carriage borrowed from the castle stables, Isolde with Raven and Wren. The magistrate's office was closed when they arrived. Alaric hammered on the door until a nervous clerk appeared, stammering about office hours and appointments. Alaric handed him a document. Emergency Jurisdiction Act. Immediate danger to minors. The magistrate will see us now. The clerk's eyes widened as he read. I will fetch him. Please wait. They did not wait. They walked into the building, tracking snow across expensive carpets, and took seats in the magistrate's private office like they owned it. Which, in a sense, they did. Nathaniel was king of this territory. These humans lived under his protection, whether they acknowledged it or not. The magistrate arrived 10 minutes later, disheveled and annoyed. He was a portly man in his 60s, with the red nose of someone who enjoyed wine slightly more than was advisable. His annoyance died the moment he saw Nathaniel. Lord Mordain, his voice cracked slightly. We were not expecting. No, you were not. Nathaniel's voice was perfectly calm. We are here to file a formal complaint against Victor Thorne. Attempted murder, fraud, violation of probate law. That is, surely this is. We have witnesses, we have evidence. And under the Emergency Jurisdiction Act, you are required to grant an immediate preliminary hearing. Alaric placed documents on the magistrate's desk. Unless you wish to explain to the imperial court why you violated emergency procedures. The magistrate looked at the documents, looked at Nathaniel, looked at Octavia, who smiled at him with all the warmth of a winter storm. I will need to summon Victor Thorne. Do it. It is nearly night. He may not come until morning. He will come tonight. Wren's small voice cut through the room. She stood up from her mother's lap and walked to the magistrate's desk. He is already on his way. He thinks we are in the castle, but we are here, and that will make him angry. The magistrate stared at this tiny child with glowing violet eyes. Who? My name is Wren Thorne. Victor Thorne wants to kill me and my sister. I saw it. I see things before they happen. And I see him coming, tonight, before the moon is high. The office door crashed open. Victor Thorne stood in the doorway, snow melting on his coat, his face twisted with rage that he was trying very hard to control. Behind him stood 6 men, rough clothes, hard faces, and in their hands, weapons. Not swords, not guns, stakes, silver chains, holy water, vampire hunting tools. Victor's eyes locked on Isolde, then on the children, then on Nathaniel. When he smiled, Nathaniel saw it. The teeth, just slightly too long. The eyes that caught the lamplight wrong. Victor Thorne was not fully human anymore. You, Victor said softly, you dare bring them here, to my town. This is not your town, Nathaniel rose. This is my territory, and you have committed crimes here that require answering. Crimes? Victor laughed. It was an ugly sound. You speak of crimes. You who are an abomination. You who steal women and children in the night. I saved them from your murder attempt. Lies. The widow fled in distress. I tried to bring her back to safety. You took her by force. Is that your story? It is the truth. Then you will not mind a formal hearing. Tomorrow, in front of the imperial judge. Alaric's voice was sharp. With witnesses, under oath. Victor's smile widened, but there was something dangerous behind it now. A hearing. How civilized. Of course, we will need to ensure the children are in proper custody until the hearing concludes. They are in proper custody with their mother, with a woman who is clearly in league with a vampire. Victor gestured to Nathaniel. A woman who has allowed her daughters to be corrupted by dark influences. Look at their eyes, magistrate. Look at the unnatural color. They are marked, cursed. The magistrate looked at Raven and Wren. Both girls stared back with violet eyes. The magistrate faltered. The children do appear unusual. They appear exactly as they are, Isolde said, her voice shaking with fury. Daughters of a seer bloodline, not cursed, gifted. Gifted. Victor's voice dripped with contempt. Yes, gifted with blood that is valuable to those who know how to use it. The room went very still. Octavia spoke, her voice like ice. And you know how to use it, do you not, Victor? I know many things, Lady Mordain, including how to become what you are not. Victor's smile disappeared. What I am is the rightful heir to the Thorne estate. What I am is a man trying to protect his family's legacy from corruption. What you are, Nathaniel said quietly, is half-turned, neither human nor vampire, stuck between both. And you need seer blood to complete the transformation. The magistrate gasped. Victor's men shifted, hands tightening on their weapons. Victor's face twisted with rage, but he did not lunge. He stood there, trembling with barely contained violence, his teeth too long, his eyes reflecting lamplight like a predator's. You have no proof, he said through clenched teeth. I can smell it on you, Nathaniel said. The incomplete transformation, the decay. You were bitten 3 years ago, were you not? By one of the rogue vampires from the eastern clans. But whoever turned you did not finish it. They left you like this, dying slowly, needing pure blood to survive. Stop talking. Seer blood would do it. would complete what was started, would give you not just immortality, but power beyond measure. Nathaniel's eyes began to glow red. So you killed your father, framed Isolde, tried to murder the children so you could drain them in private. Am I wrong? Victor's hands curled into claws at his sides, but he held himself back. Barely. This is slander, lies designed to— Then submit to examination, Octavia said. Let a physician check your pulse, your temperature, your teeth. I will not be subjected to, because you know what they will find. Nathaniel took a step forward. Victor took an involuntary step back. You reek of it, Thorn. The half-death. Every vampire in this room can smell it. The magistrate was pale, his eyes darting between Nathaniel and Victor. This is highly irregular. What is irregular, Alaric said coldly, is allowing a murder suspect to walk free while holding stakes and silver chains. Magistrate, I suggest you confiscate those weapons immediately and place Mr. Thorne under observation until the formal hearing. The magistrate swallowed hard. Yes, that seems— He looked at Victor's men. Leave those weapons here, now. For a moment it seemed Victor would refuse. His men looked to him for orders. But then Victor's eyes found Ren, standing small and brave beside Nathaniel, and something shifted in his expression. Calculation. Of course, Victor said, his voice smoothing out. I understand. This is all a terrible misunderstanding, but I am happy to cooperate with the law. He gestured to his men, who reluctantly placed their weapons on the magistrate's desk. The hearing will be at dawn, the magistrate said, sounding more confident now that the stakes and chains were out of reach. Both parties will present their cases before High Arbiter Celestine Noctis. Victor's face went white. Celestine? The High Arbiter herself? She arrives tonight, Alaric said. She has taken a personal interest in this case. For the first time, genuine fear flickered across Victor's face, but he recovered quickly, straightening his coat, arranging his expression back into wounded dignity. Very well. I look forward to clearing my name. He turned to leave, then paused at the door, looking back at Ren. I see things too, little girl, and I see you losing everything. Ren stared back at him with those luminous, violet eyes. You are wrong, she said simply. I see you ending. Victor's smile died. He left without another word, and his men followed. The office fell silent. Then Raven spoke. Is it over? No, little one, Octavia said gently, but we won tonight. Tomorrow will be harder. Nathaniel looked at the magistrate. Dawn, do not be late, and ensure Victor Thorne does not leave town. Yes, of course, Lord Mordain. They left the office and walked out into the snow. The moon was high now, exactly as Ren had predicted. The village was quiet, windows dark, people hiding behind locked doors from the things that had walked through their streets. Isolde pulled both her daughters close. You were so brave, she whispered to Ren. So brave. Ren did not answer. She pressed her face against her mother's skirts and held on. Nathaniel looked at Octavia. Tomorrow will be worse. I know. Victor will bring everything. Witnesses who will lie. Documents he has forged. Stories designed to make me the monster and him the victim. I know. Celestine will see through him. She will, but she will also judge you, brother. Your presence in that courtroom will frighten people. They will see you as evidence of darkness. Let them. Nathaniel's voice was quiet. I am tired of silence, tired of hiding. Tomorrow, I speak, and if speaking the truth makes me a monster in their eyes, so be it. Octavia put her hand on his arm. You were never the monster, Nathaniel. You just forgot you were the hero. They rode back to Shadow Peak Castle in silence. Behind them, Thornwood settled into uneasy sleep, and in his family home, Victor Thorne sat in his study with his incomplete transformation and his rage and his certainty that tomorrow would vindicate him. He was wrong. Tomorrow would end him. But tonight, For a few more hours, he still believed he would win. And that belief would be his undoing. Dawn broke over Thornwood like a blade cutting through darkness. Nathaniel had not slept. Sleep was optional for vampires, and last night he had chosen vigilance over rest. He stood at the castle window watching the sunrise, knowing he could not walk in its light, knowing that in a few hours he would enter a courtroom where his presence would be used as evidence of darkness itself. Behind him in the great hall, Isolde prepared her daughters. He could hear her voice, soft and steady, telling Raven and Wren that today they would tell the truth, that the truth was a powerful thing, that they should not be afraid because the king would be with them. The king. Nathaniel looked at his reflection in the dark window glass. 312 years old, immortal, powerful beyond human measure, king of 7 vampire clans, and utterly terrified of failing 3 people who had been in his life for less than a week. "You are thinking too much." Octavia appeared beside him, silent as only vampires could be. She wore deep blue today, formal and elegant, every inch the diplomat she had spent 2 centuries becoming. "I am thinking exactly enough. You are thinking about all the ways this could go wrong. Stop." She turned him to face her. "We have the law. We have the evidence. We have a seer child who predicted Victor's attack before it happened. We have everything we need. We have everything except a guarantee that humans will believe a vampire over one of their own. Then we make them believe." Octavia's voice was hard. "We make them see Victor for what he is. We make them choose between protecting a monster and protecting children. And we trust that even corrupt systems sometimes choose correctly when the choice is made clear enough." Nathaniel wanted to believe her, but he had lived 300 years, had seen corrupt systems choose wrong more often than right, had watched innocence destroyed by men who wore respectability like armor. "Nathaniel," Octavia gripped his arm, "look at me. You are not alone in this. I am here. Alaric is here. And in that room today will be High Arbiter Celestine herself." "Celestine is coming?" "She sent word an hour ago. She heard about the case. A seer bloodline. A half-turned vampire attempting murder. A vampire king defending human children." Octavia smiled. She would not miss this for anything. Celestine Noctis, the oldest vampire in the Austrian Empire, 500 years old and the final authority on all matters where vampire and human law intersected. If Celestine presided over this hearing, it meant the case had attracted attention far beyond Thornwood. It meant the entire vampire world was watching. "That makes it matter more," Nathaniel said quietly, "which means we cannot fail." "No pressure then," Octavia laughed, short and sharp. "Brother, you have been the silent king for 6 years. Today you speak, make it count." The hearing was held in the grand hall of Thornwood Manor, the largest building in the village. Normally used for festivals and weddings, today it had been transformed into a courtroom. Rows of benches, a raised platform for the judges, tables for the opposing parties, and people, so many people. The hall was packed with villagers who had come to see the spectacle. A widow accused of madness, a vampire defending her, twin children with unnatural eyes, a respected landowner claiming his family was being stolen. It was the most interesting thing to happen in Thornwood in decades. Nathaniel entered first, walking through doors that had been opened wide to let in the morning light, sunlight that he could not touch. He stayed in the shadows along the walls, and the crowd noticed. Whispers rippled through the room. Monster, creature of darkness, abomination. He had heard it all before. It did not matter. What mattered was the woman who entered behind him, holding her daughter's hands. Isolde wore a simple gray dress, her auburn hair pulled back, her face pale but composed. Raven and Wren walked beside her in matching white dresses, their silver hair unbound, their violet eyes taking in the crowd with unnerving calm. The whispers grew louder. "Cursed, marked demon children. Wren's hand tightened in her mother's. Raven's chin came up, defiant. Nathaniel moved to their side, standing between the crowd and the three people he had sworn to protect. His presence created instant silence. People leaned back in their seats, away from him, as if proximity to a vampire might be contagious. Good. Let them be afraid. Fear kept people honest. Victor Thorne entered last, flanked by two lawyers in expensive suits. His wrist was still bandaged from the night Nathaniel had broken it, and he walked with the careful movements of someone in pain. He had dressed for sympathy, simple clothes, modest appearance, the grieving stepson trying to hold his family together. He saw Nathaniel and smiled. It was a cold smile, a knowing smile. The smile of a man who believed he had already won. The rear doors of the hall opened. High Arbiter Celestine Noctis entered, and the entire room stood. She was not tall, perhaps 5'3" in her heeled boots, but she carried herself with the absolute authority of someone who had been making life and death decisions since before most of the people in this room had ancestors. Her hair was pure white, pulled back in an intricate braid. Her face was ageless. She could have been 60 or 600, and both would have been true. She wore robes of deep purple, the color of imperial authority. Her eyes, when they swept the room, were the silver gray of old steel. Those eyes found Nathaniel, held him for a long moment, then moved to Isolde and the twins. Something shifted in Celestine's expression, not quite a smile, but close. She took her seat on the raised platform. The magistrate sat beside her, looking like a child next to an adult. Celestine arranged her papers with deliberate care, then looked up at the assembled crowd. When she spoke, her voice carried without effort to every corner of the hall. This hearing is convened under emergency jurisdiction to address allegations of attempted murder, fraud, and violation of probate law. I am High Arbiter Celestine Noctis, and my word here is final. Are the parties ready to present their cases? Victor's lead lawyer stood. We are ready, Your Honor. Alaric stood. The defense is ready. Then we begin. Celestine looked at Victor's lawyer. Present your case. What followed was a master class in legal manipulation. Victor's lawyer, a man named Carver with silver hair and a voice like honey, painted a picture of tragedy and misunderstanding. A good man, Damien Thorne, who had married a troubled woman out of kindness, who had raised her daughters as his own, despite their questionable parentage, who had worried quietly and constantly about his wife's stability. Carver presented letters. Damien's letters, written over 8 years, documenting Isolde's episodes, times she had cried without reason, times she had argued with her husband over household matters, times she had shown excessive attachment to her daughters, refusing to let them out of her sight. The letters were read aloud, each one a small knife carefully placed, each one making Isolde sound unreasonable, emotional, unstable. Nathaniel watched her face, watched the way she sat perfectly still, hands folded in her lap, as her dead husband's words were weaponized against her. Then Carver called his first witness, Father Benedict, the village priest, a man of 70 with kind eyes and a gentle voice, who testified that yes, Damien had confided in him, had expressed concerns about Isolde, had asked for prayers for his wife's troubled mind. Did you witness Mrs. Thorne's instability yourself? Carver asked. Father Benedict hesitated. I saw her at church. She seemed withdrawn, distant. Did she speak to other parishioners? Not often, no. Did she participate in community events? She attended, but she did not engage. Would you say she isolated herself? Yes, I suppose she did. Carver nodded, satisfied. And the children, did you notice anything unusual about them? Father Benedict looked at Raven and Wren. His expression was conflicted. Their eyes, the color is unprecedented. I have never seen anything like it in nature. Would you say they appear cursed? I would say they appear unusual. Unusual in a way that suggests dark influences? Alaric stood. Objection, leading the witness towards superstition rather than fact. Celestine's silver eyes fixed on Carver. Sustained, rephrase. Carver smiled. Father Benedict, in your professional opinion as a man of faith, do those children appear touched by forces beyond normal human experience? The priest looked at the twins again. Raven stared back. Wren had pressed her face against her mother's side. Yes, Father Benedict said quietly. I believe they have been touched by something beyond normal human experience. The crowd murmured. Carver looked pleased. Alaric's turn to cross-examine was brief and surgical. Father Benedict, have you ever spoken directly with Mrs. Thorne about her supposed instability? No. Have you ever witnessed her harm her children? No. Have you ever witnessed her harm anyone? No. So your testimony is based entirely on what Damien Thorne told you in confidence? The priest shifted. Yes. And you trusted Damien Thorne? Of course, he was a pillar of this community. Was he? Alaric's voice was sharp. Or did he simply appear to be one? Is it possible that a man could present one face to the community and another to his family? I suppose it is possible. Thank you, Father. No further questions. The testimony continued. More witnesses, more letters, more documentation of Isolde's supposed madness. By the time Victor's side rested their case, the crowd was convinced. The widow was unstable. The children were cursed. Victor was trying to protect them. Nathaniel could see it in their faces. Then it was Alaric's turn. He stood slowly, deliberately, and when he spoke, his voice cut through the room like a bell. Your Honor, the defense calls Mrs. Isolde Thorne. Isolde rose. She walked to the witness chair with her head high, her hands steady. She was sworn in, and she sat, and she looked directly at Victor as Alaric began his questions. Mrs. Thorne, tell us about the night of January 15th. In your own words, what happened? Isolde took a breath. Then she began. She told them about being taken from her bed in the middle of the night, about Roy Finch and the other man binding her wrists, about being dragged through snow to the old cemetery, about being tied to a gravestone while her daughters screamed. She told them about the cold, about the certainty of death approaching, about praying that someone, anyone, would find her children before hypothermia claimed them. She told them about Nathaniel. I saw his eyes, she said. I knew what he was immediately, and I was terrified. But then, her voice caught. Then he said, I am not going to hurt you. I am going to cut those ropes, that is all. And he did. He cut the ropes and he carried me and my daughters to safety without asking anything in return. Why do you think Victor wanted you dead? Because my daughters inherit 200 acres of land with mineral rights, land worth £500,000. As long as they live and I retain custody, Victor cannot touch that inheritance. Do you have proof of this inheritance? The will was filed with the land office. Mr. Graythorne has obtained a copy. Alaric presented the will. Notarized, official, clear. Raven and Wren Thorne were named as sole inheritors of the northern lands and all mineral rights therein. Victor's face went white. Carver leaped to his feet. That will is a forgery. It is not. Alaric's voice was ice. It was filed 6 days before Damien Thorne's death. It bears his signature, witnessed by 2 officials of the land office. Unless you are suggesting those officials were complicit in fraud. Carver sat down. Alaric continued. Mrs. Thorne, these letters that Victor has presented, the documentation of your supposed instability, do you recognize them? Yes, my husband wrote them. Were they accurate? Isolde was quiet for a moment. When she spoke, her voice was steady and clear. My husband was a good man in many ways, but he was also a man of his time. He believed women should be quiet, obedient, grateful. When I cried because I was exhausted from caring for infant twins, he called it emotional instability. When I argued that the household budget should include money for the children's education, he called it inappropriate interference. When I refused to leave my daughters with servants I did not trust, he called it excessive attachment. She looked at the crowd, at the women sitting in the benches who knew exactly what she meant. I was not unstable. I was a woman trying to survive in a world that punished me for having opinions. And my husband documented every moment I dared to be human because he knew that someday someone might question his authority. He was building his defense years before he ever needed it. The hall was silent. Then Alaric called Nathaniel. Nathaniel stood. The crowd leaned back as he passed, creating a corridor of empty space. He took the witness chair, and Celestine looked at him with those silver eyes that had seen centuries. "Lord Mordain," she said, "you are king of the Transylvanian clans. Why are you involving yourself in human affairs?" "Because what was done to this woman and her children was wrong, and I have the power to stop it. You are aware that your presence here will frighten people, that some will use your involvement as evidence that Mrs. Thorne is in league with darkness. I am aware. I do not care. Justice is justice, whether humans approve of who delivers it or not." Something that might have been approval flickered across Celestine's face. Alaric took over. "Lord Mordain, describe what you saw when you found Mrs. Thorne." Nathaniel described it, every detail. The ropes tied with intention to kill, the children's bare feet in the snow, the men who fled when confronted, the coat that had been taken from a dying woman. "Why did you help her?" Nathaniel looked at Isolde, at Raven and Wren sitting beside their mother. "Because 6 years ago I lost my wife and daughters. I could not save them, but I could save these 3 people, so I did. And in the days since, I have protected them, fed them, sheltered them, asked nothing in return except that they live. Do you have any designs on Mrs. Thorne? Any ulterior motives?" "I have no designs on anyone. I am a vampire, Barrister Greythorn. We do not age. We do not die of natural causes. We exist outside the human life cycle. I do not need Mrs. Thorne's land. I do not need her property. I do not need anything she has except her safety and the safety of her children." Victor could not contain himself any longer. He stood, his voice shaking with rage. "You are lying. You want them for their blood, for the Seer bloodline. You want to drain them and—" "Silence!" Celestine's voice was not loud, but it carried such absolute authority that Victor sat down as if physically pushed. She looked at him with those ancient silver eyes. "Victor Thorne, you will have your chance to speak. Wait for it." Alaric called his final witnesses, Octavia, who testified about Victor's half-turned state, a land office clerk who confirmed the will was legitimate, a doctor who examined Isolde's wrists and confirmed the injuries were consistent with being bound tightly for an extended period. Then Alaric said the words that made the entire hall hold its breath. "Your Honor, I call Wren Thorne to testify." The crowd erupted in whispers. A 3-year-old child? Testifying? Celestine raised one hand. Silence fell. "The child is very young. I will allow testimony only if she is willing and able. Wren Thorne, will you come forward?" Wren lifted her head, looked at Nathaniel. He nodded once. Wren stood. She walked to the witness chair, her white dress dragging slightly on the floor, her silver hair catching the morning light streaming through the windows. She climbed into the chair, too large for her small body, and looked at Celestine. "Hello, little one," Celestine said gently. "Do you know why you are here?" "Yes, to tell the truth." "And do you promise to tell the truth?" "I always tell the truth. Lying makes my head hurt." A ripple of surprised laughter from the crowd. Celestine smiled, a real smile, warm and genuine. "Very well. Barrister Greythorn, you may proceed." Alaric knelt so he was eye level with Wren. Ren, you told the magistrate that you see things before they happen. Is that true? Yes. What did you see 2 nights ago? I saw the bad man coming to the castle. I saw him bringing men with silver and faith. I saw him trying to take me and Raven. Did that vision come true? Yes, he came to the magistrate's office, just like I saw. Can you see other things? Things about people? Ren looked at Victor. I see him. I see what he is. What is he? Dying. He is half dead and half alive. He was bitten by something dark and it did not finish. He needs blood to complete it. He needs our blood. Victor shot to his feet again. This is insane. She is a child reciting stories her mother taught her. Celestine did not even look at him. Sit down. She is lying. I said, sit down. The temperature in the room dropped 10 degrees. Victor sat. Celestine looked at Ren. Child, can you prove what you see is real? Can you tell me something about myself that you should not know? Ren tilted her head, studied Celestine. Then she spoke in that small, clear voice. You had a daughter once, a long time ago. Before you were like this, she had brown eyes. She liked to sing. You miss her singing. The entire hall went silent. Celestine's face, which had been composed and controlled, cracked. Just for a moment, just long enough for everyone to see the 500 years of grief behind her silver eyes. Yes, she whispered, I miss her singing very much. Then Victor made his mistake. He moved. Vampire speed, not quite as fast as Nathaniel, but fast enough. He crossed the distance to the witness chair in a blur, his good hand reaching for Ren. His teeth, longer now, sharper, no longer quite human, bared. If I cannot have them alive, I will take what I need from their corpses. Nathaniel was faster. He intercepted Victor halfway, his body slamming into the half-turned vampire with enough force to crack the floor. They went down in a tangle of limbs, Victor snarling and clawing, Nathaniel's hands locked around his throat. The crowd screamed. People scrambled back. Octavia was already moving, placing herself between the fight and Isolde and the children. Victor fought with the desperate strength of a creature that knows it is dying. He ripped free of Nathaniel's grip, pulled something from his coat, a silver dagger coated in wolfsbane, and drove it toward Nathaniel's chest. Nathaniel dodged, but not fast enough. The blade caught him in the shoulder. Silver and wolfsbane together, burning through his coat, through his skin, into muscle and bone. He gasped, staggered. Victor smiled and struck again. This time, the dagger went deep, straight through Nathaniel's chest, piercing the heart. Nathaniel fell. Isolde screamed. Raven and Ren, who had been held back by their mother, broke free and ran. They were small and fast and terrified, and they reached Nathaniel before anyone could stop them. Both girls dropped to their knees beside him, their white dresses pooling in his blood. No! Raven's voice was a child's shriek. You promised you would not leave us. Ren said nothing. She pressed both hands against the wound in Nathaniel's chest, her violet eyes wide and streaming tears. Nathaniel looked up at them. His vision was already darkening. Wolfsbane in a vampire's heart was fatal. There was no coming back from this. He had failed them. I am sorry, he whispered. Then Ren did something extraordinary. She began to sing. It was not a song Nathaniel recognized, not a lullaby or a hymn. It was something older than that, something that seemed to come from the deepest part of her, a melody that had no words but carried meaning anyway. Light began to pour from her hands, not firelight, not sunlight, something else, something violet and silver and impossibly bright. Raven joined in. Her voice harmonized with her sister's, and more light came, pouring from both of them, surrounding Nathaniel in radiance. The wolfsbane burned away. The silver dagger dissolved. The wound in Nathaniel's chest began to close. And something else happened. Nathaniel's eyes, which had been growing dim, suddenly blazed. Not red, not brown, but violet gold. The color of sunset through amethyst. His heart, which had stopped beating 3 centuries ago, began to beat again. Once, twice, 3 times, and then it settled into a steady rhythm, a living rhythm. The light faded. Raven and Wren collapsed against him, exhausted, and Nathaniel sat up. The crowd gasped. Celestine rose from her chair, her silver eyes wide. Nathaniel looked at his hands, felt the sun streaming through the windows, felt it touch his skin. It did not burn. He stood, lifting both girls with him, holding them against his chest as they sobbed into his shoulders. He walked toward the windows, toward the sunlight he had not touched in 300 years. He stepped into it. The light washed over him, warm, bright, glorious. He did not burn, did not fade, did not turn to ash. He stood in the full light of day, holding 2 children who had just done the impossible. They had turned a vampire into something the world had never seen before, a daywalker. Victor, who had been frozen in shock, suddenly screamed. He lunged again, claws extended, teeth bared, madness in his eyes. Celestine moved. She was 500 years old, and when she chose to move with her full speed, she was faster than thought. She caught Victor by the throat, lifted him off the ground with one hand, and looked at him with eyes that held no mercy. "You have violated sacred law," she said. "You have turned without permission. You have murdered your father. You have attempted to murder children. You have disrupted a legal proceeding with violence. I am the heir. The land is mine. The blood is mine. You are nothing." Celestine's hand tightened. "And now you are ended." Victor's scream cut off. His body began to crack, lines of light spreading through him like fractures in glass. Then he shattered, literally shattered, into dust and ash that scattered across the floor of the hall and was gone. Celestine turned to the crowd, to the magistrate, to Isolde. "This hearing is concluded. Victor Thorne was guilty of all charges. His claims are void. His estate reverts to his father's widow and her daughters." She looked at Raven and Wren, still clinging to Nathaniel. "The children are not cursed. They are blessed. They carry seer blood, which is sacred and protected under imperial law. Anyone who harms them will answer to me personally." She turned to Nathaniel. "And you, Lord Mordain, you are the first of your kind, a vampire king who walks in daylight. What will you do with this gift?" Nathaniel looked at Isolde, at the children in his arms, at the family he had chosen. "I will protect them," he said, "for as long as they will have me." Isolde, who had been standing frozen, crossed the room. She looked at him in the sunlight, at the violet gold eyes, at the way he was standing in full daylight holding her daughters. "Forever," she said, "we will have you forever." Celestine smiled. "Then my work here is done." She swept from the hall, and slowly, uncertainly, the crowd began to disperse. Father Benedict approached Isolde. "I am sorry," he said quietly. "I should have listened. I should have asked." "You should have," Isolde agreed. "But you can do better now. You can tell the truth about what happened here." The priest nodded and left. Nathaniel set Raven and Wren down carefully. Both girls were pale and shaking from whatever they had done, but alive, whole. "How do you feel?" Isolde asked them. "Tired," Raven said, "but good. We fixed the king." "You did more than fix me," Nathaniel said. "You changed me, made me into something new." "Do you like it?" Wren asked shyly. Nathaniel looked at the sunlight streaming through the windows, felt the warmth on his face, felt his heart beating in his chest. "Yes," he said, "I like it very much." 6 months later, summer, 1885. The wedding took place in the gardens of Shadow Peak Castle, under a sky so blue it hurt to look at. Nathaniel stood in full sunlight, still a miracle he had not grown accustomed to, watching Isolde walk toward him through rows of white roses. Her dress was cream silk. Her auburn hair was woven with flowers. She was the most beautiful thing he had seen in 300 years. Raven and Wren walked before her, scattering petals, their silver hair crowned with lavender. They had insisted on being flower girls, had insisted on everything being perfect for Mama and the king. Father Benedict performed the ceremony. The old priest had spent 6 months learning to see past his assumptions, and when he spoke the words that bound Nathaniel and Isolde together, his voice carried the weight of genuine belief. When Nathaniel kissed his bride, Raven and Wren rushed forward and wrapped themselves around both adults, unwilling to be left out of any important moment. The guests laughed. Octavia dabbed at her eyes. Even Alaric smiled. That evening, as the celebration wound down and guests departed, Wren climbed into Nathaniel's lap and asked the question he had been waiting for. "Are you our father now?" Nathaniel looked at Isolde. She nodded, tears bright in her eyes. "Yes," he said, "if you want me to be." "We want you to be," Raven said firmly, taking his other hand. "You are the king, and kings protect their families." Nathaniel felt his heart, his beating, living heart, swell in his chest. "Then I am your father, and you are my daughters, forever." Wren wrapped her arms around his neck. "I love you, Father." Those 3 words broke something open in Nathaniel that had been locked away for 6 years. Something frozen and dark, and convinced it would never feel warmth again. "I love you too," he whispered, holding both girls close. "Both of you, so very much." Later, when the children were asleep and the castle was quiet, Nathaniel and Isolde stood on the balcony looking out over mountains bathed in moonlight. "Do you miss it?" Isolde asked softly. "Being fully vampire?" "I am still vampire, just different." Nathaniel held up his hand, watching light and shadow play across his skin. "The girls made me a bridge between 2 worlds. Your heart beats now. Because of them." He took her hand, pressed it against his chest. "Because of you." Isolde leaned against him. "I was afraid for so long. I am tired of being afraid." "Then do not be. You are safe now. They are safe. We are all safe. Promise me." "I promise." They stood together in the darkness and the light, listening to the castle settle around them. Inside, Raven and Wren slept without fear for the first time in their young lives. Tomorrow they would wake to a world where they were protected, where they were loved, where the monsters who had hunted them were gone, and the monster who had saved them had become something closer to a miracle. A vampire who walked in daylight, a king who chose family over power, a father who had waited 300 years to find children who needed him as much as he needed them. "Thank you," Isolde whispered, "for not walking away that night." "Thank you," Nathaniel replied, "for teaching me what I was walking toward." The story of the silent king who found his voice in the snow would be told for generations. They would tell of the widow and her daughters with violet eyes. They would tell of the vampire who walked in daylight. They would tell of love that conquered death and family that transcended blood. But the real story was simpler. It was the story of broken people finding each other in darkness and choosing every day to step into the light together. That was the story that mattered. That was the story that would last. And it was only just beginning.